Welcome to the Totally Adequate podcast, produced by Quest Analytics. Here, we dive into the latest news, policies, and innovations in healthcare provider network management with industry leaders who are shaping the future of care. Our mission? To elevate community health across the nation through superior provider networks.
Hello, I'm April Beane, and welcome, hopefully, back to the Totally Adequate podcast. Today, we are using this episode to replay for you a session we did live back in April at the Becker Payers Issues Roundtable. I'm very excited to share this session with you. The title of the session was The Network Promise Starts with Data. You know, provider directories are no longer just a compliance obligation. They are a public-facing representation of a health plan's promise to its members. As regulatory scrutiny intensifies, and as we all know, AI amplifies the downstream consequences of bad data, health plans that treat foundational provider data as a strategic asset are going to be better positioned than those treating it as a checkbox exercise. So that's what we were covering during this session at the Becker's conference. We had leaders from Quest Analytics joined by a former health plan executive who has implemented AI at a health plan at scale. So for this conversation, we talked and explored what it takes to build foundational provider data that a health plan can stand behind. I hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Network Promise Starts with Data. My name is Bob Tavernier. I'm your moderator today. Today, I work at Quest Analytics as a solution executive. My background includes 25 years in the health plan arena, where I worked primarily with the internal, external operational areas, product, clinical operations, network, technology, product development. It's my honor to introduce our prestigious panel today, Robert Holzer and Martin Luethi. I'm going to ask Robert to introduce himself and share a little bit more background.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. So I'm Bob Holzer. He may also refer to me as Robert Holzer. This works as well. I spent the last 21 years at a healthcare payer, major one just down the street from here, HSE, and led a lot of the strategy, innovation, have a background in enterprise architecture as well, even helped stand up kind of the data information architecture team there. So I know we're going to be talking a lot about data here and the importance of that. And now recently I've started my own company, Next Horizon Innovations. I'm taking those experiences and building healthcare solutions and other solutions using AI.
Martin?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Martin Luethi. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Quest. I spent 25 years or so in healthcare technology at a variety of different companies. Optum was one of them, Strata, another one, bunch of others. And I helped build population health management systems, clinical information systems, financial planning systems. So I'm very familiar with sort of data challenges that we're focusing here. And at Quest, my focus is to build the data foundation that really helps our payer and regulator clients to build solid networks that comply and even perform very well.
Thank you, Robert and Martin. So today we have a fun-packed session. When you truly think about data, it's foundational, right? Especially when you're thinking about health plan organizations and what does that data mean truly to members from a navigational perspective, whether they're shopping for insurance, they have insurance, they're shopping for care. So what does that foundational data truly mean? This isn't a compliance discussion, it's not an AI discussion. We will blend in regulatory and AI into the discussion today, but it's really focusing in around trusting that data, knowing that you as a health plan, your data is ultimately representing your organizations, right? Based on, again, that member journey and helping to make sure it's impactful. It does have downstream impacts to your network performance, as well as regulatory, as well as your operational areas. So truly understanding the impact of data and how do you start to make things happen easier? How do you leverage AI with foundational data to start to amplify the success that you're building when it comes to data and going from there? Martin, I'd like to actually start with you around the concept of foundational data. And where would you say are the most key areas of where it would actually break within a health plan?
Yeah, let's maybe start with the definition of foundational data, sort of how we define that. So it's data about the provider. So we need to ask a couple questions of that data. So first of all, who are they? Where are they providing their service? What are they credentialed to do? And then important also, who are they affiliated with? And what is kind of like their status in kind of like the network? So that sounds pretty simple, but then layer on top of this that this data is constantly churning. At Quest Analytics, we have visibility into more than 7,000 provider networks. And as we basically dug in there, that data is changing at a rate of 2 to 3% per month. So if you look at this over a year, 30% of your data is out of date right there, assuming it was correct in the beginning, which is at times a big assumption. So that's kind of like what we're understanding as foundational data, sort of the intersection of all of that and how does this all work together. Now, where are the risks? What can happen? So as you get this data, usually comes from multiple sources. So can you reconcile the data properly or you don't? Now you have duplicates. Is the service location up to date or is that a location from months or years ago and the provider has long moved on? So having that stale data is really a big issue, and that's kind of like what we're trying to address here and look at. So there are a lot of issues, and then also line of business, right? You have providers that may be active in a commercial plan and terminated in an MA plan. Absolutely normal. That's not an edge case, but you have to have a system that actually really captures that and can sort of reflect the churn that always happens and not just something that just is built for a snapshot. We've seen people that try to do some like one-time effort to clean it up. That doesn't help because the upstream data will come back and haunt you right there. So it's really about providing the right governance around that and building the system so that it constantly can actually accommodate the updated data.
So Martin, I'm almost hearing that data is like a living, breathing organism. It's changing all the time. Robert, anything you want to add to that with regards to data currency and the life of data inside of a health plan?
Yeah, I think the only thing I wanted to add to that is you were sort of hitting at it, but just understanding the data flows, right? So, you're going to have the same data in multiple systems. That's all ultimately going to probably land in some, central provider data repository, but you need to be thinking about like the currency of where that came from. Is it need to be integrated in some way, consolidated or reconciled so that you have the most accurate information? Because then ultimately that data is going to go out to, and we'll probably get into this a little bit later, but it's going to go out to multiple locations, and that also needs to stay consistent when others are seeing it.
So Robert, when I'm thinking about data flows and the consistency of data, if we have data defects, I'm thinking there's a multiplier effect there where that data flow goes downstream. It not only impacts your operations, it impacts your network performance. It can impact you on the regulatory side. It can also impact you from just an overall member. This gets back to, one of our key points today is member trust, right? So when you're thinking about member trust, we're also talking about the ability to manage risk. So that's really where I want to take the conversation next, is really focusing in on how do weak provider data points translate to real operational regulatory risk? Robert, let's start with you.
Yeah. So I think the one thing to note, right, is when you're publishing that data into these directories that members are accessing, the same data is going to those regulatory agencies to be audited. You're going to start to expose issues if that data isn't consistent, and through the regulations, that's also going to become public. That information is going to be visible to everyone. It's going to be visible to your members, which might lead to additional member abrasion. That's also going to reduce potential trust. That might lead to fines, from the regulators. So you really need to treat the data as a strategic asset if you're not already doing that. I think in the past we thought about it as just some compliance check mark that we would go through, and and the data was what the data was. But now it's going to be very visible, and people are going to be seeing that data, and they're going to be making decisions, their healthcare decisions, based on the information that they're seeing. And so if your data is not of the highest quality, that may lead them to go to another health plan or another service. And one little thing, sorry, this is why I took notes. I just came from Cancun, so this is why my lovely glow. And so I got some notes because I wanted there's a couple of statistics I thought was really interesting as I was preparing for this that I wanted to just kind of read out. So 67% of insured adults have used a provider directory, but 58% found wrong information at least once. And then 80% of members who encountered directory errors said it made them trust their insurance companies less. That's a huge number. And then this one might be slightly outdated because you'll understand why in a minute, but 40% of members believe Google, now substitute that maybe that ChatGPT, your favorite LLM, has more accurate provider information than their plan's official directory. So people are now, they're not trusting, maybe the directories that they have access to through their health plan, and they're finding other ways to get to that information, which are probably more inaccurate than what they would get through the directories. But it's something to note and something to address as an organization.
Thank you, Robert. Martin, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely agree with what Robert said. I think 2 points I would like to add. So sort of technology almost amplifies kind of like what you have. And, previously maybe a wrong phone number was sort of, okay, well, be not so visible, but now it's really amplified. It goes through your whole system. It's used for internal decision making, may flow into contracting decisions, and then again, it's visible by members. And once it's out there, damage done, right? Sort of that's kind of like a real issue. And then kind of like really treating kind of like your system strategically and really making sure you focus on kind of like initially correcting the data whenever it appears, I think is gonna be very important to actually do versus just kind of like letting it flow, spreading into AI, spreading into your analytics, just kind of like do this earlier. The second point is on the regulator. Previously, it was sort of, okay, you just submitted something that is compliant. What we're seeing now with sort of new regulation, and I think we're talking about this a little bit later, comes into effect is they're really starting to hold payers accountable that the data actually matches what's happening in the real world, right? It's not just a submission anymore and okay, that's it. It's really, it's got to match what's actually out there. And there are some requirements in that regulation which will make that blatantly obvious when that data is not up to date.
Has anyone heard of the Real Providers Act? See a few hands. We'll talk about that in a minute. So Martin, you mentioned AI, so let's get the data right, but you also mentioned AI. AI, some people refer to it as kind of like the easy button, right? Kind of like you get into the 18th hole of the Masters on Championship Sunday and assuming you got the win. Sometimes you got to recover. But anyway, when you think about AI, help me understand, where do you start? When you truly think about what's the right way to start and where is it dangerous, Martin, when you're working within a health plan?
Yeah, good question. So obviously, AI is as good as your data. I think that's definitely something to keep in mind. If you have bad data sources, AI will amplify it. But I see like two areas in which AI works really well, and then two areas which I feel are high risk at the moment, that need some guardrails. So the first area where we have been using AI for quite some time, even before Gen AI came on the feed and kind of like onto the picture, is sort of sourcing of data, getting multiple sources in, consolidating the data, running some confidence scores on that, making sure that that all checks out, works really well. We've seen internally that if we look at sourcing, we can even go further. These are a little bit more advanced cases where we used to get at the station via call center, which we're replacing now with AI, and it works surprisingly well. And so at a fraction of the cost, so you can actually look at your data in a variety of different markets where you had some questions and can actually validate that. The second area that works well is prioritization. So really have the AI look at your data and highlight certain areas where it needs a second look. And there as well, we did a lot of things on our product side where it really saves hours and hours of analyst time, where AI can sort of highlight where there are certain anomalies in your data, where there are hotspot, data drift. If you need to replace providers, you can actually get there much quicker. So these were sort of the areas where it works very well. Where there is a risk is obviously if you now let your AI automatically change the data, and in particular when it gets closer to the member, where you kind of like have it change the data and it's not very well governed. So issue there. Also, if you have if your provenance of your data is not clear, so if you don't really govern the data sources that come in properly, you do not have sources that you trust, you don't trust, you just don't know, and then it just gets updated without supervision. You don't have visibility into when it was when it was validated. That is, at least at the moment, highly risky. So kind of like AI can and is an accelerant, but we still need some kind of like human supervision, in particular in high-risk areas.
Martin, I love your points around the workflow optimization. I think, especially the pay organizations, that you're focusing on profitability, admin cost reductions, an annual goal. You're really looking at ways to truly operate efficiently with the organizations and the suppliers that you have. To me, one of the things that I'm thinking about is truly understanding the foundation for AI and kind of where do you go from there from a framework perspective, Robert?
Yeah, I think one, I like to talk about it all starts with the people. Truly understanding, how you govern that data. Who are the owners or the stewards of the information? Do they actually even understand their role? We talk a lot about, having AI literacy programs, which is great because you're going to need those. But I think we also need to get back to data literacy programs, right? Like understanding why, data is a strategic business asset, and that everyone should be stewards of that. They should understand that and why it's important. Because, and now with the advent of AI, and if you're going to start spreading, AI capabilities, large language models where they're enabling people to do their job better, making sure they understand how to use that, and data is a great opportunity. They might start sharing and exposing, risks or information in the data that they see that maybe others haven't. So it doesn't just become a department's job to do that. I think we should be kind of enabling everyone else to do that. And I had kind of some notes around it, like, measure, what matters, so things like directory accuracy rates, time to update, member complaints tied to directory errors, even ghost provider rates, by market, things like that, like having that. And I think I talk a little bit later about this integrity kind of layer and integrity dashboard to understand that. So, and expose that across the enterprise, make it visible, make it transparent. Because the more you do that, then the more people are going to understand that it is really important, it is strategic, and it has real downstream, implications, good and bad.
Robert, I really enjoy what you're saying. I'm thinking about in AI readiness mechanisms, and where do you ultimately invest? So when you're talking with your executives and you're looking to make investment decisions, where do you minimally start with AI, and how do you move towards the path of automation?
Yeah, I think again, one, I like to think about the people, but also you don't just drop AI in, just on your systems without understanding the processes, the flows of how they interact. Are there manual workarounds that are happening? Because that happens all the time. Where I came from, there was even in our claim system, because it wasn't processing things quickly enough, people would put automation on top of that. But that also, had implications on the downstream data, the source of the information, and then ultimately where it was landing. So you need to kind of understand that the processes, the systems, are they ready to adopt AI? Do you need to think about, creating, more of a microservices kind of architecture so that you're can apply maybe, AI in the spaces where it can be truly fully automated, and then you still have the humans in the loop where you need to have the humans in the loop across the other parts of the system. Yeah, and then we've talked enough about the data stuff. I think data is obviously foundational to everything you have, and again, just reiterating, having good governance in place to be able to manage that and make the right investments in all that infrastructure and in the organizational change as well to help enable it.
So one of the things that we're hearing is obviously your foundational data is key, right? You've got to truly understand not only your processes, your workflows, the way you can synthesize data, the way you can start small and really start to work through utilizing technology, as your partner to help move forward. Where I really want to shift the conversation is it's no longer an option, right? Again, back to members' trust and truly thinking about members see your directories, whether they're using an online mobile finder through their cell phone or they're working with others to help others. It's back to that trust factor, but truly thinking about how are they operating in a regulatory world that's growing. Some of the payer organizations in here may or may have not been part of program audits, right? Different state level audits. They may have gotten a cap. They've had to focus in on provider data. There's been definitely an increase in terms of the posture and where CMS and the state regulatory bodies are going. They're thinking about things like claims data and how does claims data ultimately help to further position and focus in on accuracy and transparency of provider data. Some of you that may be close to the world of CMS saw a change with CMS last year where there was a growing need around how do we really surface on the focus area of provider data transparency, bringing data into Sunfire, using it in the Plan Finder, and helping to make it transparent nationally. The challenge with that is it ran into a social media buzz where there were a lot of challenges with that data. The challenges were so drastic that talks of special enrollment periods for members that were using that data became prevalent, that continued to grow and gain momentum around we really need a system in place nationally to help to ensure that this provider data is accurate and transparent and kept up to date, because at the end of the day, our members, right, or people within our nation are ultimately being impacted. I mentioned the Real Providers Act earlier. That was signed into law the early part of this year. So definitely it's coming, and it will definitely have different stages that's being rolled out. When you truly think about it, right, it's not only network performance internally and externally. It's not only a focus on members, it's also a focus on the regulatory side. and truly being able to stay ahead of the curve, have good systems in place, good check marks in place, good governance in place to truly magnify those efforts and really wear your network on your sleeve. I came from a session previously to here, and we hear the terms about data-rich, information-poor, right? It's not a new term, right? And the health plan organizations are filled with significant volumes of data, right? So how do you better manage it? How do you ensure that it's in the right place and that you're ultimately putting yourself in a position for success when you're focusing on meeting regulatory requirements? Martin, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would like to add 2 points there. Just for people who haven't looked at that regulation yet. So there are real teeth to this. It's obviously we'll see how well it's going to be enforced, but there are things in there where you have as a plan, you have to correct bad data within 5 business days. That's one of it. A second one is you'll have.
Can you repeat that metric?
5 business days. Got to basically correct the data. And then a couple other things that are in there. There will be a publicly available accuracy score for your provider data. So will be very public, will be very visible. If you have a bad score there, I would assume that's probably not where you want to be. And then also some other things where if you have providers listed as in-network and then things change and then a member goes there and, it turns out it actually changed, you're liable for the cost. So there's definitely some teeth to it. Still, we'll have to see how it's going to be enforced, but better to prepare for that.
So if leaders wanted to materially reduce risk, where would they start? Robert?
Let me start. All right. I think one thing that I've kind of noted in here is that you're never going to be 100% accurate with your provider and your network data and information. So just go into that with eyes wide open. That right. But you can identify things like the markets, the specialties, the highest member impacts. Highest drift, and Martin mentioned drift earlier. Fix those first. Like get in there and start fixing the problems that you're identifying. You can use your AI systems to help you identify and prioritize. Fix those first, validate the ROI, and then continue to build on that momentum. And drive things that are more member impact ROI. So you're kind of reducing or improving the trust and improving the accuracy of your data.
Would you say in improving the ROI will help with those executive discussions to continue moving forward?
I would hope so, right? I mean, if you can truly prove the ROI and you're doing these pilots to do that, you at least have the better story to tell. Because it's real, and like Martin said, there's real teeth behind this. And I think it's going to be challenging for everyone, but you're going to have to solve these problems. And I think as just someone who in the past was part of an investment in a network where we were trying to bring providers and payers together to truly solve a lot of these challenging healthcare problems. I think there's going to be the accountability is on the health plan. But there has to be this relationship with the providers to ensure that we're getting the information and think about new ways to do that and improve that.
Absolutely. Martin, anything you want to add?
So one thing to do to reduce risk. So I think it's really starting in one area, building a good process around it, and have something repeatable. I think, as Robert said, you don't get everything right, but build a repeatable process around that.
So I like the thoughts around repeatable processes and also the thoughts around providers. Some folks, when you think about provider data, they think about ownership. And unfortunately, certain folks may point fingers on, well, it's not my responsibility, it's your responsibility. At the end of the day, the members are ultimately impacted. So how do you work together? I like what Robert was talking about of involving the providers. I'm sure part of your organizations, whether you're in provider relations or you're working up front with hospital systems, patient clinics, you're working with different provider groups, involving them in the equation can definitely help to be impactful, right? To truly streamline that, truly focus in on operations and thinking about not only the data ingestion, but the data massaging through things like AI and just operationally focusing in on things like centers of excellence to help you plot those things along and help you work across the different provider arenas from there. Martin, anything you want to add when you talk about expanding scope, going broader and deeper from a line of business perspective around working with different provider organizations?
So I got a couple other thoughts around that, maybe just a little bit of a pivot there. I think working with provider organization, getting some data there, getting at the stations, I think that's definitely a good thing to do. As a payer, obviously also looking at signals that you got internally. One thing that comes to mind there is claims-based activity signals that you will see in your data. Just look at that and just see 6 months, 9 months have providers actually submitted any claims. Again, it's perfectly normal that for some business lines, yes, for some, no. But it's pretty interesting to look at the data and realizing that some providers have not treated any patients for a long period of time, which we call ghost providers. And that's definitely an area where a lot of health plans don't do this really systematically, where you potentially can get some immediate ROI by just working on that.
Thanks, Martin, for mentioning ghost providers. So ghost providers exist within the industry on an average of 10 to 12% of your entire provider network. Thinking about the size of your networks and doing that math, it's pretty significant. And knowing that depending on the provider's position, where they're at, if they're early or late in their career, whether they don't like things like reimbursement rates with certain lines of business and they're switching, the payer is typically the last one to know, right? And members run into this situation all the time. So thinking through, how do you solve for it? How do you get ahead of it? How do you help to ensure that you're staying up to date with that churn that Robert and Martin talked about earlier is critical. So where I'd like to shift this conversation now is to really focus in on some key actionable insights and a 90-day plan that you, of those in the audience, can take away. So if we were to think about one validation point when we're focusing on truly reducing risk when it comes to data in 2026, where would we start? Martin?
So if it's really one, I already spilled the beans. So it's basically claims-based activity validation and just work through that and make sure you really have a good understanding of that and then take out ghost providers. That's really what we see has a lot of value.
So Martin, when you mention claims-based activity, I think about health plan organizations, smaller or large. You've got a lot of different areas that are involved operationally within those organizations. Are there any techniques, things like AI, hackathons, et cetera, that you think would be helpful to kind of further work through use cases like that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Obviously, you won't want to do this across the board. So you have to look for kind of like high impact areas. That's where you should start instead of looking at the whole universe immediately. And it's interesting that you mentioned the hackathon. So we just had our entire team actually do a hackathon. So 100 are at the product team working through that. And it's really interesting. So it was completely AI based with how much insights they were actually able to float up, which would usually take you like months. Now it at times takes you hours. But again, it depends on your data. But that insights can really be floated up much more quickly.
Thank you, Martin. Robert, can you talk to us a little bit about another validation point that helped reduce risk in 2026?
Yeah, I think you hit on my identity trust gaps and which data sets are least reliable and why. So we kind of hit that one to death. I think I come from innovation, so I'm a big fan of I'll call it experimentation, but doing sprints, right? So use the information that Martin's talking about, the priorities. Where are the opportunities to kind of improve your network optimization or, understand where the data anomalies are so you actually can address them and do some sprints around that. Like figure out how to leverage AI to improve that, test it, validate it, understand the ROI as we mentioned before, and then build on that, like build momentum and keep building momentum because eventually you're going to get to the point where now I can start solving. So I think you hit on hackathons is a great way to do that. But just enabling your organization and different parts of the organization to be a part of that. Because it shouldn't just be the technical teams, it's the business teams. You know what? And finally, get the C-suite involved. Make them also accountable for, this being driven as a strategic asset.
So I want to make sure we have some time for questions. But before we do that, Robert, can you tell us 3 concrete actions that health plan leaders can take to get started in the next 90 days?
All right, I'm just going to give you the bullet highlight. So action 1, force alignment on one internal definition of the network. Action 2, identify the trust gaps, which data sets are least reliable and why. Action 3, then run those, focus and integrity sprints. So I kind of hit on all those throughout the presentation, but I think those are key ways to get started and you start now.
Thank you, Robert, for the reinforcement. Martin, would you like to add?
Okay, I try to be quick. So first, I would map your critical data sources and assign ownership. So then you know what you can trust and what you can't, and you know who's is responsible to fix that. Second, I will create a integrity dashboard. You don't have to use new technology. It's not about that. It's about just showing insights around where do you have duplication, where do you have high ghost provider rates, where do you have stale data, just kind of floating that all up. And then 3, kind of like take one workflow or one area and start improving that and layer in AI and show the ROI and then expand from there.
Thank you, Martin. Actually, I want to, before we get to questions, just talk about a final point. So again, your network, right, is your promise back to your members, right? You have to be thinking about things like operations, things like network performance, things like regulatory and compliance. There are tools and technology and AI that you can utilize along the way. But truly is, again, your network is truly the face of your organizations. It has a real impact, right, to members and populations across the nation. So we're truly thinking about how do you get started? How do you start to incrementally move things forward, measure success along the way, and focusing on your investments. Thank you for your time during today's session, and I'd like to open it up to the audience.
I do have a mic back here. I'm coming your way.
Thank you for your insights. My question is on the data, and are you guys planning or deploying AI agents? There's a lot of things that you've mentioned. To me, it's like a handshake between different AI agents. For example, one is watching for a change on the provider side, right? That change happens. Another agent identifies which payers should be notified. Agent on, payer side sees if it's relevant, what needs to be updated. In my view, a lot of things that you mentioned about could be optimized by intelligence of AI agents and in the whole agentic infrastructure. So any comments on that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. A lot of this depends on sort of how you're orchestrating your AI. And kind of like how you generally get started is you just take one use case, you have one agent, you kind of like do one thing. But as you continue, you start adding other things onto it. You have different agents, and then the kind of like difficulty is to really orchestrate that very well. So that's definitely one thing you'll have to get familiar with. Don't start there though, because it can get complicated pretty quickly.
Yeah. I have this like vision though. So you weren't asking this, but I think it could be possible 5 years out or more. But so with the advent of agentic and where we're going with that, having your agents at a health plan, understanding, listening to agents that are at providers, and that data is instantly being updated, then you're just instantly being, informed that information is updated, so you can kind of change your system. I mean, that's a long-term network kind of like ecosystem that has to be built out, but that would be really cool. One, it would just make it so much easier to kind of manage it,
I was going to say, and you spoke, I'll bring it over here, but you spoke earlier about how AI and the agents can accelerate that information, but there's certain times during the provider changes that you're going to need a human element in there to make that decision to escalate it somewhere else today.
It really depends on the use case. Like I deploy, in some cases, like 50 agents, and you don't deploy any technology for the sake of technology, right? So you understand the workflow, you understand where agents can just highlight 1, 2, 3, human makes a decision, but in general, humans reason, right? That reasoning can be done by advanced technologies.
Hello. My question revolves around single source of truth. So I work in Ohio Medicaid, and we're seeing this trend a lot in other Medicaid states as well, where they create a master file and say, this is the file, the sole source of truth for demographic data for all providers that take or accept Ohio Medicaid, for example. So my question is this, as we see this trend continue, is there a path towards a single source of truth? Should there be a path towards single source of truth? And if there is a path towards single source of truth, does AI help us get there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So is there a single source of truth, especially when it comes to state and Medicaid organizations? The Real Providers Act, again, it's starting at the federal level. There are implications of that going multi-line of business, but it's definitely getting the attention of the state regulators. That started in the fall last year with the buzz around it. And so CMS is stepping into those waters, crawl, walk, run, right? They're going to start to really roll these things out. But absolutely, right? If you think about leveraging economies of scale and truly being able to have a state representing their Medicaid network from a transparency perspective, from an accuracy perspective, they're absolutely paying attention to what the regulators at the federal level are doing.
Yeah, I can add too. I know in Oklahoma, CMS is doing a pilot with a provider directory as well. And they've enlisted health plans and providers to be a part of that pilot. So I think that's they're kind of stepping those toes into those waters to say, like, we probably need some better federally.
Yeah, that's the National Provider Directory Initiative. Quest Analytics was actually our data science team was part of that. To help that, and it has to be seen where this is going, but there's definitely a variety of different efforts from the regulator to do that.
Time for one last question.
It seems like most of the accountability with the Real Health Providers Act and all the federal regulations is on the payer. Are you seeing any accountability that's going to land on the provider? Because everything is like the payers are relying on the providers to submit real information. Then there's data science teams, crunching the data and saying this is a high confidence, this is low confidence. But in reality, like the accountability, in my opinion, has to lay on the providers themselves. And I think that'll be a while before AI will solve that particular problem. So any thoughts around that?
I think it's a great question. So the question was, is there any accountability on provider organizations, or is it just on health plans? I would say indirectly, yes. And the reason I'm saying that is, you're thinking about the relations that the health plans have with provider groups, hospital systems, clinics, et cetera, as well as individual physicians. It's not only a discussion around contracting and rates and reimbursement. The value-based care, as I'm sure well aware of, is continuing to expand. So there's a lot of different signals and insights that health plan organizations are working on with providers. When you think about the requirements of data accuracy, large group health rosters, et cetera, and what is going to be required of those organizations to share information with the health plan, that's where that organic conversation is changing, right? It's not just about rate reimbursement, et cetera. Things like accuracy and transparency are becoming part of those conversations. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, and we've seen sort of with some initiatives by the regulators that there's some kind of like assumption that there's some self-reporting for the National Provider Directory. I think that's part of that, but they're also still trying to figure out how this is all going to work. And then obviously got attestations, but they're often time delayed. They're often only in a few segments of the market. But definitely key to make sure that providers also have a stake in that, for sure.
Thank you, everyone, for your time today. Take care.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed that session as much as I did. It was very exciting to pull that together. We had just under 100 people in that session during the conference, and there were 4 key takeaways that I took from the conversation. One is that we constantly have to be working on improving our foundational data, and that's because provider data doesn't stagnate. In fact, Martin was quoted saying during the session that provider data changes at a rate of 2 to 3% per month. That's a lot, and a lot that we have to focus on. The second takeaway, bad data damages trust, right? So when we're talking about improving that member experience, you want to make sure that you have accurate data integrity in order to build that trust with your members. The third one was that AI accelerates the process. And what I mean by that is that AI is an accelerant. It's not the answer. We still need some kind of human supervision, particularly in those high-risk areas. And the last point that I took away was that you got to start with a 90-day starting point. You can't tackle everything all at once. You really need to focus in and take one workflow or one area, start improving it, layer in AI, and then show the ROI and expand from there. You know, the session closed with a forward-looking argument that if plans get foundational data right, they'll be positioned to act on AI, meet the new regulatory requirements with confidence, and build member trust that can withstand public scrutiny. Once again, I want to thank you for listening in. As always, please go in, give us some feedback, tell us what you want to hear about, and give us a rating. It helps us improve the podcast, and it really does matter. So thank you for listening. I want to thank our producer, Sophia Timmermeyer, and also our video production crew at Fowler House Films.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Totally Adequate podcast. If you enjoyed it, we'd appreciate it if you could rate us on Spotify or leave a review on your preferred podcast platform. Your feedback helps us grow and bring you even better content. We also invite you to send us any comments or topic ideas by emailing us at thetotallyadequatepodcast@questanalytics.com. The Totally Adequate podcast is produced by Fowler House Films, Sophia Timmermeyer, and Quest Analytics.